So let's look at the morning papers, lads, Kenny and Johnny. I love that kind of Benny Hill almost look-alike impression by, or is it Bilko from Jose Mourinho? 4 counties, though, to get a home ban, but Dublin escaped. This is a story by Martin Bretney at the back of the Irish Independent this morning about Armagh, Laois, Waterford and Wexford. They'll have one home league game, move to a neutral venue for the start of next year's championship, because they broke rules around training, around regulations around training, that because of the way that the GA is looking to cater to club games and club fixtures in April, they don't want counties training unless it's 10 days before the championship or before an All-Ireland final. So Armagh, Laois, Waterford and Wexford broke this rule. Dublin actually went to France and saw some World War I sites, but they didn't train, apparently, or they didn't break the rules. So what's the implication for this, lads, is that Wexford are meant to play Limerick next, the first game of the new season in the Allianz League next year, and they'll probably have to play that at a neutral venue. I think this is a degree of, you could get really into the semantics of, well, did you train, did you not train? And I think, to me, it seems like a bit of a harsh punishment.
Absolutely, and you know, there'll obviously be that accusation of bias against kind of the smaller counties again, and ultimately, you know, we'll talk about John Mahon's comments about where, you know, inter-county management is going with Offaly now. It's becoming uber professional. What is training, you know, and how do you stop a group of guys getting together? And is that adequate punishment? Is that going to actually really make any sort of a difference? You're going to move to a neutral venue for a game there'll be virtually nobody at. It'll slightly hit your coffers, but I don't know, John, it just looks a bit silly.
OK, the Irish Times, Sports Thursday, always a good rugby paper. Best and O'Brien in line for a turn. Of course, this is about the Irish rugby team to play Argentina, which will be named by Joe Schmidt this lunchtime. Jerry Thorney examining the team that's likely to play. Sean O'Brien set to wear green for the first time, I think, in almost a year. Rory Best has had a hamstring problem, but he's been playing for Ulster recently. Tyg Byrne, who played so well in Chicago, likely to miss out. So speculation that Will Addison from Ulster might play. Also talk with the same article, in the same, well, different article, but on the same page, but John O'Sullivan is talking about the Argentina team, but he's maybe speculating that Andrew Conway will play. But a team, lads, that has been speculated as Addison, Keith Earls, Bundy Aki, Jacob Stockdale, Johnny Sexton, Kieran Marmie and Keane Healy, Rory Best, Tyg Furlong, James Ryan, Ian Henderson, Peter O'Mahony, Sean O'Brien and CJ Stander. Obviously, Argentina, they won in Australia for the first time, I think, since 1983, will want to set a marker. Do you have any interest in the oval ball, Kenny?
I do. I've a lot of interest in the rugby team. I'm fascinated by them, to be honest with you, the last couple of years. The level that they're playing at, the consistent high level that they managed to show.
Does that upset you now as somebody who played at a World Cup as a Republic? The fact that we're in a bit of the doldrums at the moment and rugby is...
Oh, not at all. No. I take a lot of pride from the fact I'm not a rugby man, as simple as that. Yeah. I never saw a game of rugby growing up in Dublin. I don't even remember having that in my peripheral vision, cycling around Dublin, seeing a rugby game from the north side of the city. But I'd say certainly over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, with the kind of emergence of the provincials, kind of Munster initially, and obviously now Leinster, the success they've had, and obviously the international team, the level we've been playing at, particularly under Smith, I think it's fascinating in terms of the quality of rugby that we're producing, just in terms of the professionalism of the players, the attention to detail, the kind of preparation. I think they're hugely impressive people, not just sportsmen, but how they talk, how they project themselves. I think it's amazing. I can't wait for the World Cup. In terms of where we are at the moment, probably as good a chance, I would imagine, as we've ever had of actually, you know, pushing for a World Cup. I mean, we're in as good a shape as we've ever been.
Yeah. Rob Kearney is probably not going to be fit this weekend. I'd like to see Jordan Larmour against New Zealand. I don't know if we're going to get that far. John O'Sullivan writing again in the Irish Times this morning about Emiliano Baffelli at fullback, Bautista Del Gui, Ramiro Moyano. They scored an average of 3 tries, Johnny, in every game in the Rugby Championship. So this is a good test. This is a good appetizer, as it were, for the All Blacks game.
Yeah, definitely. Like, rugby wouldn't necessarily be my sport, but I was talking to Rory O'Connor from the Irish Independent during the week, and he's very, very sweet on Argentina giving Ireland a very big game here, and certainly being within the spread that the bookmakers are offering, that this will be a proper test. And I suppose getting to what Kenny is saying there, you know, as a Galway United fan, I would look on in some envy at what Connacht are doing. You go along to a game in Connacht when Connacht are playing, and there's a great atmosphere there. It's in the city centre. You can have a beer. It's a real kind of.
Is there a community around it that isn't around Galway United?
Yeah, there probably is. Like that would be one of the failings of Galway United. Galway's quite a fractured city in terms of sport and in general. Like there's so much going on, and even Gaelic games fights for its share of the pie. But rugby's become, all of a sudden, has become a huge thing. And like Connacht has never been a stronghold of rugby at all. But you just look at it, you go along and you see world class players playing on a Friday night, and ultimately. Everyone is embracing it, and you get a lot more women at games than you do at League of Ireland games anyway, by a long stretch. And it's something that I think the IRFU have done a far better job at promoting the game in Ireland in general than the FAI have in terms of managing the football situation. But we're in a great state. I think Joe Schmidt is probably a managerial genius. All I know about him, you know, every 0.0001% that he can find, he will find it, and ultimately that's what it's about. And you know, you got to be.
We have to actually stop him from leaving the country, I think.
Well, this is it. How long is he going to stay on? He's given his.
He's going to decide by the end of the month.
Yeah,
if he's going to stay on beyond the World Cup.
But it's such a young team, isn't it? It's an aging team. As someone who's a manager, you've been with a squad for a certain period of time. You've kind of aged together, and you think, well, it's a job now for another man to come in and kind of reinvent the whole thing. But you look at the names you're rolling off there. The
strength and depth is what scares me. The strength and depth of the Irish. Look at the second row. Tadhg Byrne and Devon Toner's played more games under Schmidt than anybody else. Probably won't start. The back row. Dan Levy off to South Africa, won't be involved this weekend, and he was one of the big players in the Six Nations. It is scary, and it's great to see. We had so many problems for so many years back when we were whipping boys in the Five Nations with the team that couldn't have a backup.
If they do win the World Cup, though, that would be. Just if it is quite feasible in terms of like Ireland winning the World Cup is quite feasible.
It's possible.
And what that would do for rugby, we'll say, versus 1990 for football is quite intriguing, because you know a lot of kids still want to watch football over rugby, of course. Like
it's an easier game to play.
Of course, if I had a young son, I would be extremely wary of asking him. You know, I would be first and foremost like hurling and football would be as in association football, soccer. But rugby, like in terms of where it's going with concussion and just how the physicality of players now, which it really was never up until.
No, it was a game of evasion. It was a game of the Barbarians try in 1973. I don't think it'll ever be repeated. With the great, you know, so you can have snippy wingers, and it didn't really matter what your size was. And I think we've seen it with the Southern Hemisphere teams in the 2015 World Cup. We did see a bit more of that. But I do think, it has gone in a certain linear direction in the way.
Do you think they know where they're going in terms of just the bodies of these players down the line?
I'm not so sure of that. I think it's a bit like American football. We're not going to know for 10 or 20 years where this is going. This is the Times Ireland. Interesting couple of stories here to go through, lads, today. The bottom one first. Kenny and Keane could be under 21's dream ticket. Of course, Noel King stepping down yesterday. Stephen Kenny, the Dundalk managers, just led them to a double, and Robbie Keane, who's yet to do his pro licence, but of course wants to get involved, I think, with the national setup. And then above that, we have time for the FA to stand up against abuse of James McClean. Well, let's just get Kenny to the Robbie Keane and Stephen Kenny potential dream ticket. Do you think this is a runner? Do you think this actually has legs?
Well, I thought you were going to say Stephen Kenny potentially for the Irish senior manager's job.
This might be seen as a stepping stone.
Yeah, possibly so. I think there's an argument there. I think where Stephen is at the moment in terms of his position at Dundalk, how he'd perceive the job as under 21 manager, I'm not too sure. I wouldn't say it's a step down. It's a totally different position, a different type of environment, and a different challenge for Stephen. Robbie, I think Robbie has an ambition to coach, and certainly within the international setup, I'm sure that would be appealing for him, appealing for Robbie. So for him to work under somebody for a period of time, I could certainly understand that. I think that would be something which would be a good fit for Robbie at this moment in time. Whether Stephen, I think he's certainly obviously more than capable. He's proved that in terms of how he's coached and managed at Dundalk over the past couple of years. But from Stephen's perspective, I'm not too sure the bounce from Dundalk back into the international setup at the under-21 level. I know what you're saying in terms of his step and
progression,
potential, but I'm sure Stephen Kenny would probably argue upon, well, listen, I think I've proved I don't need to bounce there on my own merits. I think I've proved that I should be a contender potentially down the road. Obviously Martin's still in the job, I understand that, but potentially 2, 4, 6 years down the road, I think I've done enough to prove I'm a legitimate contender for the senior Ireland international post. So I'm not too sure of this kind of bounce for Stephen Kenny, but in terms of Robbie and involvement of at least one of our former international players, and there's a number of them about, lads, who are very ambitious, want to get involved.
Lee Carsley is another name being
Lee Carsley. There's a lot of lads just coming. There's a lot of lads embedded in jobs already in England. Lee Carsley, I'd mentioned Stephen Reid as well, Corus Fleming, Mark Kenny's at the Academy of Manchester City. A lot of lads doing a lot of good work over in England, but they haven't got jobs. That's the only thing. A lot of lads unavailable at the moment, looking for a little bit of an experience. And it's one of those things, just try and tap into, bring a few players in, have a look at them close up, give them the experience of working with an elite group of players at a good level, and just have a look at them.
I remember bringing this up with Daniel McDonnell on one of the Saturday shows here, and he thought this would be a ludicrous move for Kenny to take over the under-21s, which I was a bit surprised at. I don't see him taking it with the likes of Robbie Keane. I think when he went to Scotland, one of the mistakes, he didn't really have his own backroom team per se, and that kind of led to a situation where there was a little bit of a separation of some of the club and then the Kenny kind of acolytes that were there, and ultimately that probably led to his downfall. At Dundalk, he brought in all those players, bar Mountney and Chris Shields. I think everyone else he brought them from the scrap heap, but he also brought in his own management team, which is Vinnie Perth and the likes of Rory Higgins and so on. But Kenny can't go much further in Ireland. The only thing that he can do now with Dundalk is another European run and get to the Europa League realistically next season and do very well. I think he really he wants that. I think their captain Stephen O'Donnell is going to have maybe a last hurrah by going for that as well. I think Patrick McLeany referenced it after the cup final. But Stephen Kenny, to my mind, is not going to get a big job in Britain. Now, he's obviously talking about this kind of almost like post-colonial fascination with Britain that we have to rid ourselves of. I don't think he's going to get a job there. The job he wants is the Ireland job. So the question mark is taking over the 21s a stepping stone for that? I think it could be. Well,
with Brian Kerr was the under 16s and 18s. He had incredible success, as you know, but he was technical director and then he got the Ireland job.
I just as well as that, I'm not sure about the signal it sends out if Robbie Keane were to get that job without having a pro licence, because I know a lot of young coaches in the League of Ireland.
Talk about Robbie though to assist a manager in the position, like as a coach, as part of the coach.
Surely would Robbie not be a really good person to have in a dressing room for young lads trying to come through the ranks?
Potentially, but what Robbie's completely unproven, and Stephen Kenny is a very unique character. He's definitely a little bit enigmatic in the way that he kind of deals with football in general. I think he's great, but he is his own man. And when he took over at Shamrock Rovers, he had a terrible time there because they weren't really his players, and he didn't have the dressing room. It was quite clear, and he rallied from that and eventually took the Dundalk job. But the question for him is this a stepping stone or not? And I think it probably is, because the under-21s are at such a low base at the moment, where the last coaching team they had, there certainly were stories that they weren't prepped enough for games.
We've never really had an under, back to Mars.
Never qualified.
We've never really had an under. Did you play for under-21, Kenny?
I did, yeah. I played a few times, yeah.
Never qualified for the Euros, which
it was a pretty dispiriting time, to be honest, which I've got to be honest. I think it was Morris Setters who actually took the team around then, and no, I don't remember the atmosphere being great. I've got to be honest with you. In terms of what was above us, it was great to be involved, of course. To be involved with the lads. I think Roy was involved in a couple of the games at that particular time. There was a sprinkling of players around who went on and done very well. But yeah, I always felt as if turning up for the 21s, it was always a case of not kind of token gesture stuff, but in terms of the kind of preparation and attention to detail and things like that. That just
should be so much more than that, John. And John Delaney, in his statement, he said Noel King brought players through to the senior team. I mean, if he's not doing that, I mean, that's the very, very least anyone should be doing. And that's just natural that that's going to happen. Like, we were absolutely hockeyed by teams, hockeyed by Germany, losing to teams we shouldn't be losing to, and we're at a situation where if Kenny got that job, I always think it's like the Derry City job at the moment. You're taking over from a mess.
Well, it's also important because the under-19s are doing very well.
Absolutely.
We have a progression into the under-21s.
And you've Tom Mohan and Colin O'Brien doing a nice job at under-8 level. And according to the reports today, Tom Mohan is kind of happy where he's at, even though it would nearly be a logical step for him in the sense of some of his players are progressing now to 21s. But I think it should be given a bit more kind of treated a bit more seriously maybe than it has, because we're at a very bleak stage in Irish football at the moment. We've had Seamus Coleman obviously taking Keith Andrews to task over his comments, but Keith Andrews was pretty much right. We're at a very bleak moment in Irish football at the moment compared to the rugby, which is at its probably peak, and we need to treat these jobs seriously. It's going to be very interesting.
I wouldn't say we're that pessimistic in terms of the quality of player coming up at underage level. I think we know enough. You probably know enough of the players under 17, under 19 talent we have available at that level. which gives you grounds for optimism going forward. So we can kind of develop that talent and kind of nurture it. Well, hopefully we'll be in a far better position 2, 3, maybe 4 years down the road, because the talent pool for me has always been there. The players are out there. It's just a case of locating them, earmarking them, giving the as best the coaching as we can from an early age. These are, I'm talking about Irish-based players within the country. Well, it is, of course it is. Like, quality coaching is huge, and giving them the right kind of platform and support network around them as we introduce them into the international setup. And obviously under 21 is the final part of that, hopefully before you pass them up to the international setup.
Well, somebody came out of the island, James McClean from Derry. This is the quote from Paul Rowan. It's in McClean's case, the FA could have fined or warned offending clubs for the behaviour of their supporters, but this has never happened. Does James McClean need more support from the FA, Kenny, in your view, over what's happened to him recently?
In what respect? What kind of support?
You just maybe taking the clubs more to task for the behaviour of their fans.
No, you can't go down the road to like fining clubs because certain individuals are in the stadium and are hurling kind of verbal abuse of any nature has always existed. It always will. I don't think James McClean needs it.
Does he need to let it wash off a bit more?
No, that's an easy thing for me to say, because I happen to live in James McClean's shoes, and clearly there's a consistent level of abuse which he has to receive indirectly, his family and kids, and that can't be very pleasant, can't be easy to deal with that. But for me, James McClean's shoulders are broad enough to deal with this. Too much interference. Talk about the PFA getting involved, the FA giving James some support. What kind of support does he need? He's a strong enough character. Yeah. He can deal with it.
He needs to be a little bit more savvy about this as well. Should
he maybe like leave the Instagram posts alone?
Yeah, like John. The wearing of the poppy is absolutely absurd across British society, that it really is like enforced upon you, and it clearly is a Premier League level where such a fuss is made about one player, not to the extent that Matic, which isn't that big of a deal. James McClean's right to not wear the poppy is completely legitimate, and I can see 100%. And the fact that like everyone you see on TV insists on wearing the poppy, you know, I watched a documentary yesterday where they were going on World War II. Like, do people really understand what went on in World War II when, like, German cities, civilians were systematically levelled to the ground? Like, do they actually go into what happened? They don't even think about it because everyone does it, and that's a dangerous precedent. But James McClean going on and invoking Bobby Sands, you know, in his posts on social media is deeply unwise. You know, just stay away from it. Keep your head down. He's explained his situation. I completely understand it. I completely agree with him. But like, his reaction to it does not help, and it makes matters worse in my view.
What's in the tabloids? Down, Johnny.
We've the Fighting Irish. On that note, that's World War I, the front of the Herald, and then obviously into the main part. Rejuvenated United, turn it around, claim big win. And obviously then we have the Guardiola signed the deal during the Bayern term, and that's according to Der Spiegel, and it also speaks about the...
Quite early, apparently.
Yeah, and it speaks about the money that he earned in his first couple of spells. And basically, the original contract with City was dated to October 10th, 2015, more than 3 months before the deal was announced. He began work in July 2016. I guess at the same time, you just look at what he's doing at Man City at the moment, and you're kind of like, notwithstanding what happened last night with, obviously, in fairness to the Herald, they didn't make a big deal about the Sterling situation, but at the moment, watching Liverpool the other night, you just think City do look that bit maybe ahead.
Well, they're beginning.
At the moment,
yeah, we'll talk about it in a second, but
yeah.
they're beginning to get that turbo boost on.
In the Mirror, we have Turin proud United stage remarkable comeback to spark Jose meltdown. I'm not sure it was a meltdown. Maybe. I think what he did was entirely justifiable. You know, he's getting a load of abuse because of his time.
I just love the photo. I think the photo's great.
Yeah.
I don't like the photo, to be honest, because it's all about him. He's made it about himself again, John, and it should be about it. It should be about his players. He should be deflecting all of that plaudits onto his players. Players should be getting all this attention.
It's pantomime, though, isn't it?
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's what it is. It's pantomime, but it's about himself. It's an ego thing, walking onto the pitch, knowing that the cameras are going to be drawn onto him, making himself the story. There's no need for that. Like, you know, he should be taking a step back, walking down the tunnel, and leaving that moment for his players on the pitch.
What's in the Star there?
And then the Mirror. So do you call this fair play, City?
Yeah.
I thought it was very disappointing, to be honest. I wouldn't blame the referee at all, because these things can happen, and you know, in any event, the Italian Job, we've had that headline before, I think.
It's a Michael Caine movie.
Yeah, Jose's win as United Steel, famous win.
Like the remake, John.
Never saw it, no.
And Robbie in the running for under 21 job, obviously, and Sterling puts his foot on it again. I think that's a pretty appropriate headline on the Raheem Sterling situation. The Sun, no class.
This is Paul Scholes, is it? Because Paul Scholes was saying that there was there could have been a bit more class shown.
Yeah,
from
Sterling said sorry afterwards, explaining, I didn't think... This is an interesting one for your late night headline writers as well, because they went with this over the Manchester United game when really... You just wonder, why did they go after Sterling here? Ultimately, it wasn't really that relevant. It was a penalty in a hockey for Man City, and basically the Juve victory was far more
consequential.
King vacates the under-21 throne, so there is a bit of obviously publicity for the Ireland situation, and then the Irish Daily Mail fall guy. And obviously then Robbie Henshaw's mentioned, I proved the doubters wrong, but Sterling kicks the ground, referee points to the spot. Should player say no penalty?
I would have no problem with Sterling in that instance if he was totally convinced that it was his fault. You know, and he was immediately sensed that this isn't a penalty. I have no problem with him going to the referee and saying, "Look, ref."
He admitted it afterwards that he was.
Oh, that doesn't matter afterwards. If you're talking, that was the moment for him to approach the referee. That would have been the case.
About 20 years ago,
20 years.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It's
we're getting old, lads. We're getting old.
Yeah. It's an easy thing to say. I wouldn't be overly critical of him, but I wouldn't have had a problem with him approaching the referee in those circumstances.
Just the breakfast menu we're going to look at today. We're going to have a bit of a chat about interesting sporting topics. Derbies, sporting events, a bucket list sporting events we'd like to go to. European Super League, this perennial talk about a European Super League. Stadiums, what are the best stadiums and what are the ones that possibly disappoint? And today's sporting birthdays, which is something I kind of conjured in my late night Red Bull state. There's some interesting sporting birthdays today. So lads, let's just start off with derbies, because of course it's Manchester United and Manchester City this weekend. Johnny, you said you were at the Milan derby recently. What was the experience like?
Yeah, I got the iconic kind of treble in the Dublin, Belfast and Milan derbies in the space of a couple of weeks. Went to Dalymount, the Oval, and then the San Siro. So I suppose the Dublin game was Rovers and Pats, which was quite pleasant in Inchicore. And then I went up to Belfast for the traditional kind of what they would call the two Protestant clubs, quote unquote, even though I'd object a bit to that term, but the two of the big clubs really in Belfast. But it was interesting being at the Oval because it's so old, and I think it may have even been bombed during the war, and it looks like they didn't really do it up all that much because it's just so old. But it has that, it's the Oval, and it has that oval kind of shape, and it just feels like an old football ground. And it was a Monday night. I think there were like 4,500 at it, and it was a good atmosphere, and it felt like the Irish League's isn't in a great way, but it kind of felt like a throwback to the old days when it was. And then I went to the San Siro. What was interesting in San Siro was the price of the tickets, because not that long ago, you could go to these games for 20, 25 quid. It was 75 quid for a ticket. Now, it was sold out, but it didn't have that. The Milan derby doesn't have that intensity because there were Milan fans sitting beside Inter fans, a bit like a Gaelic Games game in Croke Park. It didn't have that kind of hatred that you would get in other places. So
that surprised me.
Yeah, that surprised me.
Yeah,
I think Juve now playing either of those sides would be a slightly different story. Juve would be hated by both teams, and in fact, my friend over there, he's from Dublin, but he's dating a girl from Italy, and he was telling me about her mother, how she's an Inter fan, but she absolutely hates Juve. The passion that they hate Juve. So when Juve are coming over shortly to play Milan, and that's different. But the Milan derby is a lot more cordial. The Milan fans had their section. It was an Inter home game nominally, but there were Milan fans kind of peppered all over the ground.
Because they're feeling a bit sorry for each other these days. The lack of success over the past.
Maybe in the mid-90s it might not have been that way when they were really successful. These clubs, AC Milan were just off the back of winning European Cups. Inter Milan, I think it was a Trapattoni, or winning UEFA Cups. Kenny, did Millwall have a rival when you were?
How have we gone from Millwall from the San Siro?
It had to be.
Have you been down to Millwall at West Ham?
The Den.
The Millwall was a West Ham
game. You haven't?
No.
Oh, there you go. There's one for you.
It is.
Potentially going forward.
What was
you won't see too many supporters mingling.
Birmingham Villa was
side by side at that game.
Well, as a Galway United fan, what disappoints me is we don't have a derby game really. We kind of let on that Sligo are our derby rivals, but we don't have one. But I've been to Istanbul, and
did you do Fenerbahce Galatasaray?
No. if I did, I probably wouldn't be here today, because that's so intense. Like, it's insane, and you wouldn't know what happened. I've been to a game in Istanbul, and it was a friendly game between Galatasaray and Fiorentina, and the Galatasaray stadium has recorded the loudest noise ever created in a stadium, and it was in 2011. Galatasaray were playing Fenerbahce, and I've never experienced anything like Turkey. I thought it was absolutely insane, and I'd love to go to a derby game there. That would be my main ambition in terms of a derby game.
South America for me in terms of
Super Classico, the Super Classico, Boca Juniors and River Plate. That is the game of the world that everybody should go to. I haven't been, but I just know the Bombonera, the chocolate box in Buenos Aires. That is the game.
I can see Johnny doing a little podcast from there, or some sending a few pictures back to the studio.
What was the most intense match you played in, Kenny?
You played in Iran, didn't you?
You played in Iran, did you?
Yeah, I was over for the Iran game. Yeah, I suppose it was to an extent. It was a lively atmosphere. Yeah, there was always the flares going off. There was a few bits, a few exploding voices came onto the pitch prior to the game and the warm up and things like that.
You had the images of the two Ayatollahs kind of on the. I love that in these kind of dictatorships in countries like that, where they put the portraits of the leaders up in the actual ground. Like North Korea would be an example, and I'm pretty sure
will it be Trump in 3 years' time in the States?
It possibly will. That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
I think it can be overplayed, though. I've got to be honest with you.
You've got to enjoy that, though.
No, exactly. The intimidating atmosphere. Now people talk about Turkey. The draw is made. You get a Turkish team, Fenerbahce in your group. Oh, it won't be easy. Won't be easy going to Turkey. The atmosphere there.
If you score and you silence them, isn't that half the battle as well?
Yeah, exactly. But players, as Johnny alluded to there, players love it. They revel in it. If anything, it brings more. I think in some respects, it brings more pressure on the home team. To be honest, which is an argument to be made for that. The expectancy level rises for the home team. So as an away player, and players now are so experienced at that level, international football and European, they're used to it. Actually brings more out of them, I think, being the away team going to those kind of.
But do you remember the most intense atmosphere you played in as a club player, Kenny?
You're not letting this go, He's not letting.
Come on, Kenny.
Not letting it go, well. Well, I suppose it'd only be there. I suppose derbies predominantly. I would have played Millwall. I just mentioned there West Ham. They would have been great games to play in. Fantastic. You're talking about supporters now. The Millwall West Ham, there'd be a huge rivalry there. People say borderline kind of hatred, kicked off a few times and all of that. But the actual support base from both clubs, the people, they're very same part of London. Traditionally, Millwall came out of East London anyway. A lot of those families, East End families, would be split Millwall, West Ham anyway. So in terms of that kind of real kind of working class East End background, those supporters are they're the same people. You go into a pub, you talk, you wouldn't know who was West Ham. The very same attributes. They come from the same place. But in terms of their loyalties to the football club, it's, both ends of the spectrum. So that was great. That lended itself to a great atmosphere. And it didn't need 60,000. I remember playing the old Coblow Lane. You're not going to, unfortunately, not going to experience that. Millwall's old Coblow Lane.
Yeah, I've been at the new den, but I haven't been at the old one.
You get 12, 15,000 in there, Millwall, West Ham, and that was allowed. Played a derby game in there. It was absolutely electric. You're talking about Sterling taking a bit of a dive. Took a bit of a dive myself there.
Oh no! Here we go.
VAR. Exactly. Alvin Martin. He left his leg there. He left his leg. The old classic. He left his leg. I was entitled.
Was it a foul? If you go down,
he was 43 years of age at that stage. He dangled the leg, and I was a bit out of my comfort zone in the opposition penalty box. I took the opportunity to go over and won a penalty kick. Got a penalty kick. Yeah.
Do you still feel bad about it?
Never felt bad about it. In all honesty.
First revelation of that.
It could be. Yeah, but I would say leg was offered. The leg was offered. And
I don't know. My view on Kenny has altered.
In terms of atmosphere, that was great. And then I would say my first game at Birmingham Aston Villa. Birmingham, the club had just come back up into the top flight. First game was played at Aston Villa, evening kick-off. That was pretty electric, very contentious-ish. A couple of sending out, Dion Double got sent off, thrown the head at Robbie Savage, all of that type of thing, and it was brilliant. We had to stay in the ground for a while after we couldn't go out. It was all going off around the ground. We had to sit in the dressing room for a period of time and just soak it up, and that was a great feeling. I remember that one in particular, actually. That meant a lot to supporters.
A lot of these things, they don't really have any actual meaning anymore, in the sense of what's different between Shamrock Rovers and Bohemians, or what's the difference between Manchester City and Manchester United. But if you go into kind of post-war zone areas, can you imagine the Kosovo national team taking on Serbia or something like that? Can you imagine the passion that it's just the raw kind of feeling of what went on in those countries in war situations in recent years? That's when it really matters, and you can actually feel there's a visceral hatred here. But there's still great occasions, just the actual derby games, and particularly in the grounds where the old grounds where people are standing and they're really getting going, rather than now the modern grounds today, which have probably changed things.
Well, just some comments in here from people on YouTube and on our social channels. Kevin Kilban 2007 on YouTube. Now, this is not the real Kevin Kilban. This is another Kevin Kilban. The best stadium was Vicente Calderon. Dara on YouTube, the old Lansdowne Road, of course, Kenny would have played in, was class. David on YouTube, the Camp Nou, and yes, I've been there during games when it's full, it's mind-blowing. Patrick on YouTube, best stadium ever, Plough Lane. I think you must have played there, Kenny, did you?
Oh, played reserve team game there. Funny enough, it was just in the process of being dismantled. That would have been the old,
I think Wimbledon
the old Wimbledon. Yeah, potentially going to build a new stadium on the site, which would be great. The club really going back into it. The dogs, yeah.
There's no dog track in London anymore.
Just on bucket list sporting events briefly, because I think this is kind of tied to, you know, the events you want to go and see. For me, I think it would be the Super Classico would be an absolute one. The Masters and the Super Bowl. Would be there anything in the top 2 or 3 of you that you love to go and see that you haven't been to?
Oh, sporting occasions. Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Ryder Cup. I wouldn't go to a Ryder Cup. I love the Ryder Cup. Absolutely. Just, I love it, but I can't bear it. Tension. But that's because I'm on my sofa watching on the telly. I don't think... I remember going to a Carol's Irish Open once, Pope Marnock, and being little bit of a letdown, just in terms of, you know, trying to get a bit of eye line, you know, racing down, fighting the crowds, constantly aggravation in terms of seeing a shot. Much preferred it as a viewing spectacle on my sofa watching the golf. But big sporting events, probably those classic South American, the top South American game. You mentioned River Plate and
Boca Juniors.
Boca Juniors, like, yeah. I think that would maybe stand alone. Big rugby occasion, even to be honest with you. I mean, if Ireland were to progress World Cup next year,
you'd be back out. You'd be back out in the Far East, Kenny.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, all those bittersweet memories. Yeah. But I think even something like, particularly from an Irish perspective, like I said, something just part of the occasion. I'm not a big one for. I've never generally wanted to go out of my comfort zone, to be honest. But yeah, I know. What about you?
I'd like to see North Korea play in Pyongyang. I think that would be absolutely insane, because they're on a different level altogether. They're basically completely indoctrinated and there's soldiers all over the stadium. That would be incredible. I'd like to see PAOK Thessalonica, the Greek team. I'd love to see them play. I've never seen fans like them. Probably play against AK Athens maybe. And thirdly, I'd like to see the Jets and the Giants play in the Super Bowl, because I've a bit of a fondness for I have a lot of cousins in New York and I've been to see both teams, and I'd like to see Galway United play anyone in Europe. Would be nice as well.